Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. My team and I were supposed to be sharing some reruns with you all week so we can make some time to prepare the amazing things we have in store for you this summer. But then this past week hit. I've seen it, you've seen it for weeks. I think all of our social media feeds have been full of videos of people going about their daily lives, walking down the street, taking out the trash, going to work, and then suddenly...
Stop! Police are coming! Stop! They do not have a warrant!
They're questioned and sometimes violently apprehended and even arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. Last Friday, dozens of ICE agents with weapons and armored vehicles conducted raids throughout downtown Los Angeles in places they believed to have large numbers of undocumented workers, like Home Depot or the mom and pop shops of LA's Garment District. As word of the raids spread, hundreds of people showed up in downtown LA to protest.
They're doing tear gas right now. Shame on you!
Then President Trump deployed 2,000 California National Guard troops to Los Angeles in response to the protests and even accused protesters of being, quote, paid insurrectionists, a claim backed by no evidence, I should note. The protests spread to major cities around the country, with a lot of Americans questioning why it seems like the government can ignore constitutional law and violate the rights of everyday people, seemingly with impunity. So my team and I wanted to share with you this bonus episode to process this moment. And to help us do that, I'm joined by NPR immigration correspondent Sergio Martinez Beltran.
Hey.
And constitutional law professor and author of A Protest History of the United States, Gloria J. Brown Marshall.
Hello, Brittany.
We're seeing these peaceful protests in major cities across the country, from New York to Los Angeles, but we have also seen some really incredible and devastating footage coming out of places like LA, where we've seen people arrested and attacked by police or military forces. We've seen cars on fire and curfews set. How can this moment of national protest that we're seeing be instructive for the rest of the country?
This whole moment shows us that President Trump is going after everyone who is in the country without authorization. These raids are happening in so many places. They're happening at the Los Angeles Home Depot parking lot, where we know day laborers show up every day to get picked up to be able to go to work. Mm-hmm. So it's happening there. I was just in Puerto Rico a few days ago, covering the immigration raids in Puerto Rico, in Barrio Obrero, which is a Dominican neighborhood there.
In Santurce, yeah. I've been.
In Santurce. Yeah. Right. It's the heart of the Dominican community in Puerto Rico, and there's a lot of raids. It just happened at a meatpacking factory in Nebraska. So these raids are happening everywhere, all across the nation. So it's almost like everything everywhere all at once.
Interesting. Okay. Sergio, you're in New York City, where there are protests happening right now, too. Tell us about your experiences on the ground in New York. What have you seen at these recent protests?
Yeah, I mean, in New York City, I have to tell you, Brittany, it was pretty remarkable because there were thousands of people who showed up yesterday to this protest in front of one of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement field offices here in the city. I talked to people that were, 17-year-old. They were high schoolers, to people who were in their 70s and 80s. Many of them, I have to say, either have a loved one who is not in the U.S. or who is in the U.S. without a legal status, or they themselves were undocumented at some point, and now they were able to become either a citizen or a permanent resident. So it felt very personal for a lot of people in this protest. And also, lots of them told me that they were coming out in representation of those who are too scared of coming out because they're afraid of being picked up by ICE or by other federal immigration enforcement agencies. There was a lot of chanting, there was a lot of energy, but it was super peaceful. Now, towards the end of the protest, like it happens in many instances, there were some arrests, I think a couple of dozen arrests. But again, it was, for the most part, peaceful, even though there were thousands of people marching at the same time.
I wonder, how do you square the protests you and your NPR colleagues are seeing in the streets with the general public perception of these protests?
Something that I was telling my colleague, Jasmine Garst, we were covering the protests yesterday together.
Yes, Jasmine, we love having her on the show.
Yes. We were talking about how, as we were walking through the streets of Manhattan, for many people, life continued. They were still doing their dinner. They were still doing their afternoon drinks and happy hours. And it was almost like the protest that was happening in front of them was not happening. They were completely ignoring this group of thousands of people. So I think that feeling can be seen throughout the country at this point still.
And I'll add this one part. Not everybody is going to believe in protest. There are people who have never believed in protest, but they want to reap the benefits. They're freeloaders for the most part. But when you think about it, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, that speech he gave, the mountaintop speech he gave the night before, was a speech trying to get ministers to be a part of his protest movement. He had earned the Nobel Prize. He was an international figure, and he was still trying to convince people to protest. So there's always going to be only a small part of people who put themselves on the line. It's the same thing when it comes to union membership. There are people who are not going to join the unions, but they want the benefits that come from union membership.
Trust me, I have dealt with that very directly before in my life. And it is a very interesting dynamic and an interesting frame of mind. Gloria, what do you wish more people knew about the role of protest in a democratic society?
Well, especially in this particular society, protest is the reason why we have the rights we wake up with every day. Not because they're on paper. That's there, helpful, of course, it's law. But without protests and people going out forcing those words to be something that was real in their lives, it would mean nothing. They would just be words on paper. And so what we don't understand generationally is one generation comes in, they protest for certain rights, they put their lives and livelihoods on the line, they get those rights, secure them, and then they turn around and become oppressors. So even though the Declaration of Independence is a protest document that we're going to be celebrating 250 years next year, we also had the Alien and Sedition Acts that came so closely after that in the 1790s, where those same immigrants who came in and protested against England signed legislation to crush protests by these new immigrants. So this has been an ongoing pattern of this country attacking the most vulnerable people, people of color in particular, and the labor class of immigrants.
Wow. Okay. Sergio, what do you wish more people understood about the protests that maybe they're misunderstanding through, watching the news or reading about them?
I think for a lot of people, this is personal. Many of the people in this country who came here without authorization or were allowed in the country through a legal pathway, they came fleeing dictatorships, authoritarian regimes. And I talked to them today, and they told me this feels very similar to what we left. The vibes are very similar. I mean, talk to a Venezuelan migrant who left their country because of the Maduro regime, who maybe their loved ones or they themselves were arrested for protesting in Venezuela, and then they're here in the US and they're seeing how people are being arrested for protesting, or even them themselves are being picked up.
Coming up.
When you disturb people like that, of course, there's going to be a negative sense of what a protest represents. But most people who protest, it's because they have skin in the game.
Stay with us. There are plenty of people that believe, protesting is fine so long as it never turns violent or destroys property. Yet there have been plenty of instances throughout history where protests became violent as a result of police or military intervention. The protesters are often blamed, while the police or military are seen as simply doing business. It seems like there are a lot of conditions and contradictions as far as what actually constitutes violence and who's being violent against whom. Gloria, what do you make of all this?
It's been from the time period of this nation's grounding. Think about, and in my book I talk about, when the Native Americans, the indigenous, defended their land, they were savages, they were brutal. But when the English and the Europeans, attacked the Native Americans, they were doing so as people with a God-given right to take the land. So there's necessary violence on their side, but when it comes to the poor, when it comes to people of color, when it comes to immigrants, then their violence is something that's heathen bound and coming from a horrible place, and that should never be condoned. Now think about the contradiction in that.
This makes me think of something I think is very key when thinking about this in a more historical sense. Oftentimes when protest is occurring, it's far less popular at the moment than it is in hindsight. I mean, according to an early 1968 Harris poll, Dr. King had a staggering 75% disapproval rating at the time of his death. But I mean, today he's got a national holiday and his organizing tactics are held up as the gold standard for what it means to protest the right way. But back in the 1960s, Dr. King was definitely not thought of as a person who was engaging in protest the right way. What do you think causes this gulf between how the public views protest in real time versus how the public views protest in hindsight?
One thing about protest in the time period of the civil rights movement, as well as the labor rights movement, is that there was strategy to it. They decided they want to disrupt in ways that would make people listen, pay attention. Those people were disturbed who wanted to have their meal or just go about their business. And so when you disturb people like that, of course, it's going to be a negative sense of what a protest represents. But I will say that most people who protest, it's because they have skin in the game. But at the time of discomfort, at the time of disruption, it's difficult for people to look at that in a positive way if they're not part of the action to benefit from it. They don't understand when systems change, it's uncomfortable. But years later, they're going to benefit from it.
Something that, as Gloria was talking, I think of these two words that she mentioned, discomfort and violence. And I think we're seeing a lot of people who voted for President Trump who are now starting to get uncomfortable. He said, we were going to deport millions of people as a country. We're going to take the criminals. We're going to send them away. They voted for that. And now we're starting to see people getting uncomfortable because guess what? Their neighbor is the one being deported. The person who helps at church, their pastor, is the one being deported. They're people they love, they have a connection with, they are being deported. They are being detained. They're being picked up by ICE. Now that person is not showing up.
When you talk about detainment and arrests, President Trump has claimed that he wants to arrest 3,000 migrants a day, okay? But the threat of arrest is not just something that he is directing at immigrants and undocumented people. After a few days of protests, President Trump said that California Governor Gavin Newsom should be arrested, to which Newsom replied, quote, "These are the words of an authoritarian," unquote. Given both of your expertise, what does the end of this road look like to you?
We need to see the commonality of what is happening in our country that begins with the most vulnerable. And then as the ball of oppression rolls down and starts picking up other people, they understand that they can be next, that these arguments that can be made against Governor Newsom or a judge or anybody else, that the arrests that are taking place could be them next. That's the history of protest. We're dealing with divide and conquer, and that commonality of spirit is what we need in our protests right now so we can better understand that we're in this mess together.
Brittany, you know me. I'm not a betting man, so I will not try to bet on what will happen next. But I do think a couple of things here. I think it's clear that President Trump is sending a message. and he's using all his power. He's already talked about sending the military to other states if there are protests like the ones we've seen in California. So he has promised something, and I think we should believe it, that he will do it because he has been doing it already. When I think about the future too, when we look back at this moment, it might look very different to what we've been used to because the administration has been pushing those limits, those boundaries, and at times being successful at it because the Supreme Court at times have even sided with them.
We are really at a crossroads right now, and I'm so glad we could have you both here to make sense of it. Gloria, Sergio, I have learned so much in this conversation. Thank you both so much.
It's great chatting with you again.
Power to the people.
That was NPR's Sergio Martinez Beltran and Gloria J. Brown Marshall, author of A Protest History of the United States. And I'm going to put on my influencer hat for a second and ask you to please subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're listening. Click follow so you know the latest in culture while it's still hot. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.